anybody who doesn't know, we took all your kids to jump off cliffs. No, we had a great time Friday night. We went up to the cliffs over the Hiwassee River and had a pretty good turnout of people, and I think a lot of people who weren't planning on rappelling decided to go after getting up there. And I'll tie that in just a second with some other thoughts. But I've been praying and thinking a lot about overcoming. It's a word that we use a lot, and we've talked about it a lot over the years. But in different areas of our life, what does it look like? What does overcoming mean? And I think we've described it very, very well in a lot of different things. So I kind of want to summarize a couple ideas just quickly so that we can put them in our minds and use them. But one thing that overcoming means, rather than just some idea that the sum of everything I do will be overcoming the sum of the evil that I'm facing or the sum of the difficulties in my life. That's one aspect of overcoming. Over time, you want to overcome whatever you're facing. And that's one aspect of it, and it's something that you need to keep in your mind and in your heart. But not just that, it also means overcoming with the temptations and the weaknesses that you face on a daily basis on those personal levels. And there are scriptures that apply to that. One that comes to mind immediately is resist the devil and he will flee. But we don't put that into practice because we think that by saying magic words, the devil will flee, instead of resisting him, literally resisting him in our thought and in our choice right at the moment. That is resisting the devil, and he has to flee. He doesn't flee just because you say, get out of here. Sometimes he might. That might be something that works in that moment, but more often than not, it comes through you choosing to say, no, I'm not going to think that way. No, I'm not going to do that. And where we come to a weakness on that a lot of times, I've found anyways, that in a moment, I'm thinking about the future and about facing this temptation forever. And I'm like, man, I can't do that. And so overcoming is not thinking about this insurmountable mountain that you have to overcome. It's resisting the devil right then and saying, no, that's not the mind of God. That's not his heart for me. And so, no, I'm not going to do that, even though everything in me is being tempted to be selfish right now. And I can say, no. So in that second, for that moment, you overcome that thought, and you overcome it with good. You overcome that evil with good, with the wisdom, with the truth of God, saying, no, that's bad. God doesn't want me to do that. That's good. And you overcome that thought. That's overcoming in a nutshell. And you can always do that. I know that there have been many temptations that I've overcome immediately. And then others that I overcame, and then it came back, and I didn't overcome. So it can be an ongoing battle, but you can overcome that thought right then. So that takes us to another phase of the battle of overcoming. It is controlling our thoughts, taking thoughts captive, meaning that when the inception of the thought comes into our brain, it can come from four major sources, I guess. From starting with, it can come from us, it can come from other people, it can come from God, and it can come from Satan or demonic forces. Yeah, any thought can come from those four sources. So to take a thought captive means when a thought comes in your head, you don't just accept that it's supposed to be there. When it comes in there, you vet it. You don't have an open border in your mind. When that thought crosses in and the inception happens, you don't say, oh, come on in. It's not, you're supposed to be here. You stop and you say, hey, who are you? What are you here for? And why are you here? What's your purpose? You figure it out. That's taking the thought captive. So instead of letting a thought happen and then running down that road with it, hey, come on, buddy, let's go wherever you're taking me. You stop it. And you overcome the thoughts that are leading you away, because the Holy Spirit is with you. The more you add through growth in walking with the Lord, you have more tools to use it, but the Holy Spirit is with you. And if you speak to it and talk to that thought in this metaphor here, you take it captive. He doesn't have the right to roam around your brain and tell you all different kinds of things that aren't in keeping with God's word and his ways and his will. And so you take it captive and you say, nope, okay, you are not supposed to be here. You obviously didn't come here for a good purpose. And sometimes, I'm sure, and I know that I have done this, I don't have a formula, because I don't think formulas exist, really, but sometimes you can discern that, hey, that thought really did not come from me or from God. It came straight from a demonic thing. It was an attack, and you can discern that. And so you immediately say, that thought's not good. I am against that thought, and you in your mind, you violently stand against it. These are mental exercises that we've talked about Caroline Leaf, and she describes some of the different things. But when you do that thought attaches to negative, and you don't like it anymore. And so when you don't like it, if it comes back, you recognize it faster. But when you don't do that, and the thought is a temptation to you, it attaches to good in your mind. Even though it's negative, even though it's bad or it's evil, it attaches to good. So when it comes back, you immediately like it. You're like, oh, here's my little buddy. And the little buddy's telling you to go do something you shouldn't do. But you like that little buddy anyway. And so when that thought comes into your brain, that's what it does. It simply, you have to put it in the right category. And that's what taking captive the thoughts is about. And so when you put it in the negative, when it comes back, your mind, especially the more often you do it, immediately responds to that type of thing, and the associated things that go with that thought are evil. They're negative, and you don't want them. And so in that sense, you overcome. It's a very simple process, and you can quickly see results of overcoming, especially for specific things. Maybe there's something that has been hitting your brain over and over again, and we immediately think of big ones, and they're harder to put down sometimes, but really they're still just thoughts. When you catch them when they cross the border, it's a lot easier to stop them rather than trying to find them as they've wandered through your brain and wandered through your mind and attached to many other things. It's a whole lot easier to stop those right then. And so big problems like that turn into sexual immorality, that turn into addictions, bigger problems that manifest in our lives, they start with that same little thought. And even if you're already addicted or already coming out of sexual sins, the thought still occurs the same way every single time you're tempted. It may be, you may have gotten very used to accepting these thoughts, but the more you can go back to the beginning of each thought. And I remember praying when I was 18, God, please, I want to see this thought, this temptation, before I'm being tempted. I want to see it for what it is. I remember praying that, and I prayed it a lot. But God answered the prayer. I started seeing, hey, you know what? I am bored right now. I don't have anything going on, and my mind is wandering onto these thoughts. And so God started revealing to me, take that thought captive. Don't let it happen. If you need to, which is not necessarily the full victory, but if you need to, do something else. Just do something. Just stir yourself to where you are no longer the cliche phrase that if I can word it right, I get my cliches mixed up and say them backwards. Yeah, exactly. Idle hands do the work of the devil. And there's a lot of different ways that you could phrase that, but it's true. So and it doesn't mean resting necessarily, because you can have a very active mind when you are resting. But when we reward ourselves. This is human nature. We reward ourselves after being diligent. We reward ourselves with being lazy. And being lazy is not the same thing as resting. You can rest and you can recreate, you can enjoy life without being lazy. Laziness is a passive state of mind. When we're talking about laziness in our mind, it's a passive state where we are influenced by the input around us. And as we're influenced by the input around us, because we don't have anything particular going on, things become interesting or a temptation. And so, if you want to have victory over these things, one of the first weapons you have is to stir yourself and not be lazy. People turn these things into formulas, and I really don't mean it to be that, because I think that's a first stage weapon, and it's not going to succeed very long if you stay there a lot. If you stay in a state of laziness or passive in your mind, you're not going to succeed very often with, okay, now I'm going to stir myself. You're going to succumb to the temptations that come. So that's a first stage weapon in this battle of overcoming the thoughts and taking them captive. So if you realize that, hey, man, I'm being tempted, I'm going to go call my buddy, I'm going to go play disc golf, I'm going to do something. You can overcome temptation that way, but it doesn't equal long-term success. Long-term success comes from not being lazy. Yeah. I don't know. I hadn't really thought it out on that level. I'm sure if you know and understand your laziness more, it becomes a sinful thing because you're giving into it when you know you shouldn't be. Yeah, definitely leads to sin. Absolutely. That's another form that takes, rather than just being completely passive. It comes from not participating in what you should be, and so therefore you become susceptible to many other things stimulating you that you shouldn't have been involved in at all, mentally or even physically. But I don't want to get too complicated with these thoughts, but just that taking that thought captive, recognize where it came from. There's an upside to that too. It's not always a negative thought. You begin to discern when a thought comes from God. You begin to recognize, hey, this thought is something from God. And so you begin to cultivate that thought and let that thought go into all the places in your mind that it's supposed to be, so it takes full root and gives you strength and gives you character. Over time, you start discerning those things. So when you take the thought captive and you examine it and you vet it completely before you let it into your life, you find good ones. Instead of letting that good one go, you bring it in and you take that thought and you let it become what it's supposed to be. And so there's a big positive in that. We capture the moments of life that when God is speaking to us, it takes root and it becomes something that we are able to walk out in our life, rather than, man, Why don't I have the ability to stand against temptation? Well, maybe it's because you didn't receive the wisdom of God that he was revealing to you, because it came in one little thought. So just like the little thought that led to the big temptation, the big success in your life came from a little thought that God wanted to cultivate. So it's a very positive thing, and that's both of those things are part of overcoming. You can't overcome when you aren't equipped. Just like you go to a job and you don't have your tools, and you get out and I'm going to do it. I've literally done this. Got up in the morning, I was running a little bit behind, forgot to check that I had taken my tools out to do something else, and I drive 30, 45 minutes to the job site, and I get out and I'm like, let's go. And I don't have my tools. The main one I forget is like my belt, and so I have a holster that holds my squeegees on, and so I'm having to put them in my pockets and they're falling out, or I take bungee cords and tie them around. But it can be frustrating, and I've literally gotten to the job site and just had to turn around and drive home because I forgot it. Thankfully, that hasn't happened very often, but it has happened. But that's what we do when we have the equipment and the weapons and the tools that God wants to give us. When we don't have them, we face a job that probably wouldn't be that hard. Most of the things God calls us to do are not that hard in their minute-by-minute interactions and the things that we are doing. It's not that hard, because faithfulness yields faithfulness. It builds on it and gives us strength one step after another. And so I was just thinking about overcoming, what that looks like. And I think if we grasp that it's okay, it's necessary, take the thoughts captive. And one thing that I've found that I love is it has made my downtime much more exciting. When I'm watching a movie or if I'm interacting in different things, my mind is less passive than it used to be. And I'm able to watch a movie and I get something, man, that was a great point out of it. And while I'm watching the movie, even though it's a totally not a spiritual context, you see, hey, these themes of life come from God. They're true and they have reality. Or you see, no, you know what? That's a bad theme. That's something that has no place, and it's being portrayed as if this is the way life is supposed to be. No, it's not. But you become less passive and you start recognizing it. And because most movies, even fantasy movies, are all based on basic human thoughts and emotions and interactions and choices, you begin to recognize, hey, you know what? It yields that fruit in society. It yields that fruit in my friends. And so you begin to recognize it. You begin to stop the bad, embrace the good, and you also begin to pray for people struggling. It's an amazing journey that takes place through overcoming, through taking every thought captive. And I'm sure many of us are thinking also of times when we haven't. And the cool thing about our brain is, I was just telling David and James back there that this week Claire Brewer had a mini stroke, and thankfully there's nothing wrong with her from that. And so what happens in a stroke is, in large and small ways, and depending where it happens, the impact is different. The blood gets blocked up and it kills parts of your tissue in your brain. And so when it hits that, your brain immediately, and this happens immediately, and it happens, that's why they say take aspirin or something if you think you're having a stroke, because it can dissolve it, and your brain immediately stops being damaged as much, but it also immediately starts reforming the connections around the damaged area. So that if it's something that's not very vital, in a short amount of time, you'll overcome it. Your brain will naturally overcome it. And so I say that because if we're struggling with something that has already taken root in our mind, God designed our brain that when we take it captive, when it becomes isolated, now we're recognizing it and we're standing against it. It may still have tendencies, but our brain immediately begins to take what we put in our brain as good and starts recognizing it as bad, and it starts separating it from all the connections that it has. And what Caroline Leaf has described, and I've said before, is that eventually those things dissolve. The literal physical part of your brain that has taken on, and the way the thoughts normally will look, they look like a tapestry weaving through your brain because they attach in all different ways. But evil things literally become masses in your brain. These are microscopic, but they become masses in your brain where your thoughts, instead of being this flow of threads of thought, become masses that literally stop you from having your proper response to situations. And so, but over time, when you do that, she said it takes 21 days to begin that process. It's not that long. When you stand against a thought and you say, nope, that's wrong, you do it over again, it begins to take root in the way your brain forms, and they begin to dissolve. Greater or lesser things that are ingrained in your life take a little bit longer because they are attached to more things, and the mass is bigger in your brain. But it literally dissolves out of your brain. You're healed. You are literally healed by the power of God, by standing and overcoming and not accepting these things, taking them captive. You are literally healed. Your brain stops being damaged. And so any area that we are struggling with that we realize, and I was praying last night, God, I've got to overcome. I want to overcome. And mentally standing against struggles that I know that I am having. Trying to put those things in motions, intentionally overcoming by intentionally standing against things that got into my life. I'm sure of some of them I'm not sure exactly when, but got into my life because I accepted a thought and accepted it as true when it was a lie, or accepted it as something I wanted to do when it should have been something I shouldn't have wanted to do. And so I stand against those things, and it's so fun, actually. Especially if you're a competitive person, it's fun because you stand against things, you start seeing them get weaker. Like a football analogy is two teams that are equally matched, and they fight the whole game long. The one who has the will overcomes their tiredness, and by the end of the game, you can see the team that doesn't have as much of a will just get worn out, and they just get pushed back. And so on a competitive standpoint, it is really cool when you're facing something, you see it get weaker and weaker and pushed back. And it's fun. It really is. It's exciting. And I think we need to recognize that. It's not always this negative, oh my gosh, I've got this struggle. No, yeah, it's a struggle, but going back to what I started with repelling. It is, in some ways, very unnatural to a lot of people to walk up to a cliff, look over it and say, I want to jump off. On some levels, that's completely fine, completely good. But the mental battle, I've witnessed it, and I've even faced it. I definitely have not had much fear of heights in my life, but I remember one time I walked up to a cliff and I was showing somebody how to rappel, and I hadn't rappelled in probably 2 years or more. And I'm sitting there showing them the ropes, literally, showing them how to do it, and I'm going to rappel, and it's a 200-foot rappel. And at this point, I'm backing up to a cliff, and I'm talking, so I'm not thinking about the rappel. I'm just explaining it. And right as I'm about to jump, I froze. I realized I'm jumping off of a 200-foot cliff, that this particular cliff didn't have a bottom. My rope wasn't long enough to get to the bottom, so I had to rappel down and then get onto a ledge, which sounds bad, but it wasn't that hard. But you don't just go all the way down because the rope is descending down off the cliff, and there's another 30 or 40 feet below that if you actually went off, you'd just slide. It wasn't a sheer cliff. But I'm realizing that, and I froze for a moment, and I had to take that fear and process it.
quickly, partly because I didn't want to be embarrassed. I was showing off for my buddies. I had to man up. But no, I had to take it captive. I had to realize, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I know how to do it. And it's actually a fun thing to do. And so I immediately processed that in about 5 or 6 seconds and overcame that and jumped off. But watching people rappel is something that is very, very enjoyable. And I never, when it comes to anything like jumping off of waterfalls or something like that, never push anybody emotionally to do it. Always encourage if they want to do it. If it's something they want to do, explain how they can do it, because it's cool. You see them overcome the stages of nope, never going to do that. Well, maybe I see people doing that. It's something that's doable, and they go through those stages, and it's really fun. I love seeing it because you see somebody who got on the cliff and just they're really tense and they're just trying to figure out how to do it, and then the next time they come up, they're like, hey, man, I like this. And they just lean back and they go. And you see them bouncing off the rocks, swinging as they're going down. Becomes more and more a freedom in their life. And that's where what we face so much throughout our struggles, that there are things that we don't know. And we learn more. We face it. And we decide sometimes, you know what, that's not something I'm going to do. That's not something I should be doing. Or there's something that, you know what, that is something that I'm limited right now by my inexperience and my fear. You gain your experience, you overcome your fear with the truth of God, and you're set free. And I know it's kind of silly because it's just rappelling, and I don't want to put it in too high of a category, but it does. It can, simple things like that can free you mentally. I got to see all 3 of my kids rappel, whereas last time we went rappelling, they weren't sure about it. They had gone rappel in tandem with me when they were smaller, but when they were doing it themselves, they were hesitant and didn't want to do it. But this time they overcame their fear, and they all did it. And I think they all liked it. But that's in a nutshell. Just wanted to talk about overcoming because it's something that doesn't have to be lost in the fog of ideas. It's something that's very simple and very real.